The crystalline sound of silverware clinking against porcelain was the only audible noise in the luxurious dining hall of the Monarch, New York City's most exclusive fine dining restaurant. Charlotte could feel the piercing gaze of Logan on her, but she avoided meeting his eyes. She wore an elegant emerald green dress that hugged her curves delicately, though she was certain he had already scrutinized what he would call her flaws. The murmurs of conversations at the surrounding tables seemed distant, almost inaudible, as she focused on steadying her breathing. Something was about to happen. She could feel it. Logan dabbed his lips with the linen napkin, setting his plate aside with a subtle movement. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, and gave Charlotte that cold, calculated look she had come to dread. "Charlotte, we need to talk," he said, his tone low but heavy with finality. Charlotte's heart raced. Something in his voice made the ground beneath her feel unsteady. She swallowed hard, gripping her wine glass tightly without realizing it. "Now?" she asked, managing a calm tone that betrayed none of the storm brewing inside her. Her eyes finally met his, but the hardness in his gaze made her instinctively pull back. Logan exhaled as though summoning a reservoir of patience. He leaned back in his chair, studying her like one would evaluate a difficult problem. "Charlotte, you know how important my public image is. My work demands that I remain in the spotlight, and, well..." He hesitated for a moment, as though selecting his words carefully to amplify their impact. "I don't think you're keeping up in the way you should." The words hit her like an invisible slap. Her cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment but from a simmering anger that began to bubble in her chest. Yet instead of lashing out, she took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. "What exactly are you trying to say, Logan?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly but firm enough to signal she wouldn't tolerate evasiveness. Logan leaned forward again, this time more serious, but still retaining the arrogant tone he often used to justify the unjustifiable. "I mean, that you've changed, Charlotte. Since we got married, you're not the woman I met." He paused, letting his eyes scan the table, as though the words were written somewhere on the linen. "I'm talking about your appearance, your image. It no longer fits the life I need to present." His words cut deep, like sharp blades slicing through her confidence. Charlotte blinked, her eyes stinging, but she refused to let the tears fall. Not here, not in front of a man who now felt like a stranger. Her silence seemed to unnerve him. "Charlotte, I'm not saying this to hurt you. It's just reality. I need someone who matches the lifestyle we've built together. Is that too much to ask?" he finished, as if trying to convince her he was being reasonable. Charlotte didn't respond. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, the humiliation weighing on her chest like an anchor. When she finally looked up, there were no tears in her eyes, only a determination she didn't know she possessed. Then, "Logan, maybe the problem isn't what I've become, but what you've always been," she said, her voice low but laced with strength. She stood, grabbed her clutch and walked away, leaving Logan alone, stunned and for the first time speechless. That moment would mark the end of one chapter in her life and the beginning of another. Charlotte drove aimlessly through the streets of Manhattan, the glow of streetlights casting fragmented shadows across the car's interior. Her tears, hot and relentless, blurred her vision as Logan's cruel words echoed in her mind like a haunting refrain. "You've changed. You don't fit anymore." The humiliation she had suppressed at the restaurant now erupted like a tidal wave, overwhelming her completely. Eventually, she found herself parked on a quiet street in the West Village, the engine humming softly as she leaned her forehead against the steering wheel, struggling to breathe through the storm of emotions. For years, Charlotte had poured everything into her marriage with Logan, believing in their shared dream of building a life together. But sitting alone in the darkness, it became painfully clear that dream had always revolved around him. Her trembling fingers hovered over her phone before she dialed the only person who had always been her anchor, Lauren, her best friend from college. Lauren picked up after the second ring, her familiar, upbeat voice tinged with concern. "Char, is everything okay?" "No. No, it's not," Charlotte whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the admission. He destroyed me, Lauren." Lauren didn't hesitate. "Where are you? I'm coming to you right now." True to her word, Lauren arrived less than 30 minutes later, knocking gently on the door of Charlotte's modest one-bedroom apartment on the Upper East Side. The apartment, which had felt more like a temporary storage space than a home, now seemed cold and lifeless. Charlotte hadn't bothered to decorate, clinging to the hope that she'd eventually return to the sprawling penthouse she shared with Logan. Lauren entered with 2 bags in hand, one with a bottle of Pinot Noir and the other filled with junk food. Without saying a word, she wrapped her arms around Charlotte, who collapsed into her friend's embrace, her sobs uncontrollable. "He said I wasn't good enough anymore, Lauren," Charlotte managed to say between gasps. "That I didn't fit into his life, that I've changed." Lauren pulled back, her expression fierce, her hands gripping Charlotte's shoulders. "Let me tell you something, Char. You have always been good enough. He's the one who isn't. You hear me? He doesn't get to define your worth." Charlotte looked away, the weight of Logan's words still pressing down on her. "I don't even know who I am anymore, Lauren. I built my whole life around him. I don't know how to start over." Lauren softened, brushing a tear from Charlotte's cheek. "That's exactly what we're going to figure out, one step at a time. But the first thing you need to stop doing is letting Logan's voice live rent-free in your head. He's not the authority on you. You are." The words landed like a lifeline in Charlotte's storm of self-doubt, but the weight of starting over still felt insurmountable. She knew Lauren was right, but where would she even begin? The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the curtains of Charlotte's small apartment. She was still curled up on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket Lauren had left before heading to work. The faint sounds of Manhattan waking up, honking taxis, distant chatter, barely registered as she stared at the ceiling, feeling utterly lost. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking her trance. Charlotte reached for it hesitantly. It was a message from Lauren. "Good morning, sunshine. I left you coffee and a bagel in the kitchen. Also, I signed you up for a trial at the fitness studio around the corner. Don't argue, just go. Love you." Charlotte sighed, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Lauren's relentless optimism was both comforting and irritating. A fitness studio? She hadn't set foot in one in years, not since Logan's subtle, backhanded remarks about her not being the gym type. She hesitated for a long moment before sitting up and stretching. Maybe Lauren was right. She couldn't keep wallowing. She needed to do something, even if it felt small and meaningless right now. After a quick shower and a sip of coffee, Charlotte pulled on leggings and a loose tank top. The fitness studio Lauren had mentioned was a sleek, modern space with tall windows and minimalist decor. As she stepped inside, she felt a wave of self-consciousness. The other patrons, athletic, confident, moved between machines and yoga, mats with ease. "Hi, welcome," said a cheerful young trainer named Ryan. "You must be Charlotte. Don't worry about anything today. We'll take it easy, just get you familiar with the space." Charlotte nodded nervously, grateful for his warmth. Ryan guided her to a treadmill, and as she started walking, a strange sensation crept over her. The rhythm of her steps, the steady beat of her heart. She hadn't realized how much tension she'd been holding until it began to melt away with each stride. It wasn't easy. She was out of shape, her body unused to the strain, but there was something cathartic about sweating out her frustrations. Every drop felt like a tiny rebellion against Logan's judgment, a quiet protest against years of being made to feel inadequate. By the end of the session, Charlotte was exhausted but lighter, as though a small crack of light had broken through the darkness that surrounded her. Back at home, still riding the wave of that newfound energy, she began rummaging through old drawers. Her fingers brushed against a familiar object, a leather-bound sketchbook she hadn't touched in years. She opened it slowly, revealing pages filled with designs she had once dreamed of bringing to life. Before Logan, before marriage, she had wanted to be a fashion designer. She had spent hours sketching dresses, imagining the women who would wear them, women who felt beautiful, strong, and unstoppable. Somewhere along the way, that dream had been packed away, just like the sketchbook. Her hand hovered over a pencil, on the table. Tentatively, she picked it up and began to draw. The lines were shaky at first, but soon they began to flow. For the first time in years, Charlotte felt a flicker of excitement. The sound of the pencil moving across the page filled The quiet apartment. Charlotte leaned over her sketchbook, completely immersed in the familiar rhythm of creation. The hours seemed to slip away as lines turned into shapes, and shapes turned into visions of garments that felt like they carried a part of her soul. She paused, sitting back to examine her work. On the page was a dress, a sleek floor-length evening gown with bold, clean lines and a daring open back. It was striking, unapologetic. It was everything she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, since the confrontation with Logan, Charlotte felt alive. Her phone buzzed, breaking her focus. It was Lauren again, her timing impeccable. "How was the gym? I want updates. Also, lunch tomorrow I'm buying." Charlotte smiled and replied quickly, "Survived the gym. Found my old sketchbook. Let's talk tomorrow." The next afternoon, Charlotte met Lauren at a cozy cafe in the Flatiron district. Lauren was already seated, a latte in one hand and her tablet in the other. She waved enthusiastically when she saw Charlotte approaching. "Okay, spill," Lauren said as soon as Charlotte sat down. "What's this about your sketchbook?" Charlotte hesitated, unsure of how much to share. She felt both protective and uncertain about the creative spark she'd rediscovered. "I don't know. I just started drawing again last night. It felt good. Like maybe it's something I need to explore." Lauren's face lit up with excitement. "That's amazing, Char. You've always had an incredible eye for design. Remember in college when you made all those custom outfits for our dance team? You could totally do this." Charlotte looked down, tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "But it's been years, Lauren. I wouldn't even know where to start, and who would care about what I have to say now?" Lauren reached across the table and grabbed her hand. "Listen to me. People need to see the real you, not the version you were trying to be for Logan. You're creative, passionate, and talented. If this makes you feel alive, then you owe it to yourself to try." Charlotte nodded slowly, her heart swelling with gratitude for Lauren's unwavering support. The idea of putting herself out there still felt terrifying, but there was also a glimmer of possibility that was too enticing to ignore. When she got home later that evening, Charlotte spread her sketches across the small coffee table. Each design seemed to speak to a different part of her: strength, vulnerability, defiance. She decided to take the next step. She searched online for local resources and stumbled upon an independent fashion workshop in Brooklyn that catered to aspiring designers. The description mentioned access to professional equipment, small production runs, and networking opportunities with seamstresses and pattern makers. It was perfect. Without allowing herself to overthink, Charlotte signed up for a consultation. As she closed her laptop, a nervous excitement fluttered in her chest. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was reclaiming a part of herself that had been buried. The following week, Charlotte found herself standing outside the converted warehouse in Brooklyn where the workshop was held. The building's industrial exterior was adorned with murals of vibrant colors and bold shapes, a stark contrast to the sleek, cold spaces she used to frequent with Logan. She hesitated at the entrance, her palms slightly sweaty as she clutched her portfolio of sketches. It had been years since she'd walked into an unfamiliar space with the intent of pursuing something for herself. But this time, it wasn't for a man, a marriage, or anyone else's expectations. It was entirely for her. Inside, the workshop was buzzing with activity. The air smelled of fabric and fresh coffee, and the rhythmic hum of sewing machines filled the space. Designers of all ages worked at their stations, some sketching feverishly, others pinning fabric onto mannequins. The energy was electric, and, for a moment, Charlotte felt a flicker of intimidation. "Hi, you must be Charlotte," a voice interrupted her thoughts. Charlotte turned to see a woman in her mid-40s with a warm smile and a chic, effortless style. She introduced herself as Maria, the director of the workshop. "Thank you for coming in. I've had a chance to review the sketches you submitted online, and I have to say, you've got a really unique perspective. Why don't we chat in my office?" Charlotte followed Maria to a small glass-walled room at the back of the workshop. Inside, Maria motioned for her to sit, spreading Charlotte's sketches across the desk. "I love how bold these are," Maria began, pointing to one of the evening gown designs. "There's a confidence here. These aren't just clothes, they're statements. What's your inspiration?" Charlotte hesitated, feeling the weight of Maria's gaze. "Honestly, Women who feel like they've been overlooked. Women who've been told they don't fit in. I want these designs to make them feel powerful, seen and beautiful. Maria leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. That's a message people can connect with, and I think you're in the right place to bring it to life. Charlotte's chest swelled with a mixture of pride and relief. For the first time, someone outside her small circle had validated her vision. Maria continued, "Let's start with a small run of your designs, maybe 5 or 6 pieces. We'll pair you with one of our pattern makers to help refine the details and get everything ready for production. Does that sound good?" Charlotte nodded, trying to suppress the nervous excitement bubbling up inside her. "That sounds perfect." As she left the workshop that afternoon, clutching a folder of instructions and deadlines, Charlotte felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. This was no longer just an idea or a fleeting escape from her pain. This was a beginning. Later that evening, back in her apartment, Charlotte spread out the workshop materials on her dining table. As she worked through the logistics of fabrics, timelines and costs, a thought crept into her mind. What would Logan think of all this? She shook her head, frustrated with herself. Why did his opinion still hold space in her thoughts? He had made it clear how little he valued her dreams. This was hers now, and she refused to let his shadow cloud her progress. That night, Charlotte worked late into the hours, her apartment illuminated only by the warm glow of her desk lamp. Sketches piled up around her as she poured every ounce of her emotions into her designs. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving, she was creating. A week after starting her work at the Brooklyn Fashion Workshop, Charlotte was beginning to find her rhythm. Her days were filled with sketching, selecting fabrics, and collaborating with a pattern maker named Evelyn, whose calm demeanor and sharp attention to detail proved invaluable. It was exhausting, but for the first time in years, the exhaustion felt meaningful. Each decision she made was hers alone, every stitch and every line on the page, an extension of her newfound determination. One crisp Friday evening, Charlotte decided to treat herself to a quiet dinner at a small, trendy Italian restaurant near her apartment. The dim lighting and soft hum of conversation created a comforting atmosphere as she settled into a corner table with a glass of red wine and her sketchbook. She had just started outlining a new design when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Charlotte?" Her body stiffened before she turned, already knowing who it was. Logan stood a few feet away, looking both surprised and oddly uncertain. His tailored navy suit was impeccable as always, but there was something softer in his expression that caught her off guard. "Logan," she said evenly, closing her sketchbook and setting it aside. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," he replied, his lips curling into a half smile. "I was meeting a client. I didn't expect to see you here." "Well, I wasn't expecting to see you either," Charlotte said, trying to keep her tone neutral. She reached for her wineglass, hoping the sip would steady her nerves. Logan glanced at the empty chair across from her. "May I?" She hesitated but nodded. "It's a public place, I can't stop you." As Logan sat down, she could feel the weight of his gaze on her. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the tension between them palpable. "You look different," he finally said, his tone softer than she remembered. "Happier." Charlotte arched an eyebrow, leaning back slightly. "I am." His eyes flicked to the sketchbook on the table. "Are you drawing again?" "Yes," she said simply, resisting the urge to elaborate. She didn't owe him any explanations. Logan nodded slowly, as if digesting the significance of that single word. "I always thought you had a gift for it. I guess I never said that enough." Charlotte felt a flicker of something, anger maybe, or regret, but she quickly buried it. She wasn't going to let herself be drawn back into old patterns of seeking his approval. "I don't think it would have mattered if you had," she said, her voice steady. "I had to find that belief in myself." Logan flinched slightly at her words, but to his credit, he didn't argue. "I deserved that," he admitted quietly. "And I know I deserved worse." "Charlotte, I can't tell you how many times I've replayed our last conversation in my head. I was cruel, and I've regretted it every day since." She studied him carefully, searching for any sign of manipulation or insincerity. But his expression was open, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "Why are you telling me this now, Logan?" she asked, folding her hands on the table. "What do you want from me?" "I don't know," he said after a moment, his voice almost a whisper. "Maybe just a chance to say I'm sorry. And maybe I want to understand who you've become. Because from where I'm sitting, it's clear that I never really did." Charlotte didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to walk away, to shield herself from the rawness of the moment, but another part, the part that still carried the scars he left, needed to hear this. Before she could decide what to say, their server approached, breaking the tension. Logan stood, his movements slow, almost reluctant. "I should let you enjoy your evening," he said, stepping back from the table. "But Charlotte, if you ever feel like talking, I'd like to listen." And with that, he walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts and a heart that felt heavier than before. Charlotte sat in silence after Logan left, her thoughts racing as she stared at the empty chair across from her. The wine glass in her hand felt heavier than before, its contents untouched. Logan's words lingered in her mind like a melody she couldn't turn off. "Maybe I want to understand who you've become." It wasn't what he said that unsettled her, but the way he said it, with a softness that felt genuine, unlike the cold, calculated Logan she had once known. She wasn't sure whether to feel anger, pity, or nothing at all. Instead, she closed, her eyes focused on the one thing that remained constant throughout the evening: herself. The next morning, the encounter still weighed on her, but Charlotte forced herself to focus on the tasks ahead. At the Brooklyn workshop, she dove headfirst into finalizing her designs for production. With Evelyn's help, she carefully adjusted the patterns to perfection, ensuring every seam, fold, and detail reflected the strength and elegance she wanted to communicate. The workshop buzzed with its usual energy, designers chatting over bolts of fabric, machines humming steadily. But Charlotte worked in relative silence, lost in her thoughts. Every now and then, Evelyn would glance over, sensing the shift in Charlotte's demeanor. Finally, during a coffee break, Evelyn approached her. "You've been quieter than usual today. Something on your mind?" Charlotte hesitated, her hands wrapped around the warm ceramic mug. Evelyn had become more than just a collaborator in the past few weeks. She was someone Charlotte trusted. "I ran into someone last night," Charlotte admitted. "Someone from my past." Evelyn nodded, her expression encouraging. "Was it complicated?" Charlotte let out a dry laugh. "That's an understatement. It was my ex-husband." Evelyn's eyebrows lifted slightly. "And how did that go?" "He apologized," Charlotte said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "He actually admitted he was wrong. I wasn't expecting that." Evelyn leaned against the counter, her arms crossed thoughtfully. "And how do you feel about it?" Charlotte shrugged, staring into her coffee. "I don't know. Part of me wanted to scream at him for everything he put me through, and another part of me wanted to just let it go. But mostly, I'm scared. That hearing him say those things is stirring up feelings I don't want to revisit." Evelyn placed a reassuring hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "You're allowed to feel conflicted. Healing isn't linear. But remember this, you're building something incredible here. Whatever you decide, don't let anyone, even him, take that away from you." Charlotte nodded, Evelyn's words resonating deeply. She didn't need to have all the answers right now. What mattered was staying focused on her goals and not losing sight of who she was becoming. Later that evening, as Charlotte returned home, she noticed an email notification on her phone. It was from Logan. Her chest tightened as she hesitated to open it, but curiosity got the better of her. The email was brief, almost painfully so. "Charlotte, thank you for listening last night. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't undo, but I hope we can find a way to talk more when you're ready. No pressure, no expectations, just honesty, Logan." Charlotte stared at the message, her emotions swirling like a storm. She didn't respond, not yet. Instead, she closed the email and opened her sketchbook, pouring her feelings into her work the only way she knew how. As her pencil moved across the page, creating bold shapes and striking silhouettes, Charlotte realized something important. Logan's apology didn't change her path. It didn't erase the pain or undo the growth she had fought so hard for. But perhaps it was a weight lifted, just enough to let her move forward a little lighter. 2. Weeks passed, and Charlotte had thrown herself entirely into her work. Her designs were no longer just sketches. They were becoming reality. The first samples of her collection had arrived at the workshop, and the sight of them hanging on the racks filled her with a sense of pride she hadn't felt in years. Each piece reflected her journey. A flowing satin gown with an asymmetric neckline symbolized grace through imbalance. A tailored blazer dress represented power reclaimed, and a playful yet elegant jumpsuit with bold cutouts spoke of confidence unapologetically displayed. Evelyn stood beside her, running her hands over the fabric of a gown. "Charlotte, these are stunning. The craftsmanship, the details, they're everything you imagined and more." Charlotte smiled, her fingers brushing the fabric of the blazer. "They feel like pieces of me," she admitted, "but the real challenge is going to be sharing them with the world." Maria, the workshop director, approached them with a clipboard in hand. "Speaking of sharing, I have some exciting news. One of our contacts in the industry caught wind of your work and reached out. There's an upcoming showcase event for independent designers in Soho next month. They're offering you a spot." Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. A showcase in Soho wasn't just an opportunity, it was the opportunity. The chance to introduce her designs to the fashion world, to finally step into the light as an independent designer. "That's amazing," Charlotte said, her voice trembling slightly. "But it's also terrifying." Maria chuckled. "That's how you know it's worth doing." The rest of the day was a blur of planning and preparation. Charlotte spent hours coordinating with Evelyn on final adjustments and creating a mood board to present the collection's themes: empowerment, resilience, and authenticity. As the sunset, she found herself alone in the workshop, staring at the pieces she had poured her soul into. Her phone buzzed on the nearby table. It was another message from Logan. She hesitated before opening it, unsure of whether she was ready to face whatever he had to say. "I hope this isn't unwelcome, but I heard about your showcase. Congratulations, Charlotte. I always knew you had this in you." Charlotte stared at the message, her chest tightening. Part of her wanted to ignore it, but another part, the part still working through the echoes of their shared history, felt compelled to reply. After a long moment, she typed, "Thank you, Logan." It was short and simple, but it was enough. The night before the showcase, Charlotte stood in her apartment, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She wore one of her own designs, a sleek black dress with a high slit and a structured bodice. It was elegant, commanding, and undeniably hers. As she adjusted her hair, a thought struck her. This moment wasn't about Logan, or even about proving anything to him or anyone else. It was about reclaiming her voice, her identity, and her future. The evening of the showcase arrived, and Soho buzzed with energy. The venue, a modern industrial space with exposed brick and high ceilings, was alive with chatter, music, and the quiet hum of anticipation. Charlotte stood near the back of the room, watching models prepare backstage while guests mingled, sipping champagne and admiring the displays of emerging designers. Her collection, titled Emerge, was set up along one of the main platforms. 6 mannequins, each dressed in a piece that represented her vision, stood under soft, golden spotlights. The sleek lines and bold details of the clothing stood out against the neutral tones of the room. On a nearby easel, a sign read, "Emerge, a celebration of resilience and identity by Charlotte Reed." Charlotte adjusted her blazer dress, a piece from her collection, and tried to steady her nerves. Evelyn and Maria had joined her for moral support, and their encouragement had helped her through the last-minute chaos. But now, as the showcase began and attendees trickled toward her display, she felt the weight of every decision she had made to get to this moment. "Charlotte," Evelyn said softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Look around. People are noticing, they're stopping, they're connecting with it." Charlotte glanced toward the platform and saw 2 women admiring the designs, their voices filled with admiration. One of them gestured to the satin gown, saying, "This is exactly the kind of elegance that doesn't feel out of reach. It's powerful." Hearing those words gave Charlotte a jolt of confidence. She straightened her posture, letting herself take in the moment instead of letting her nerves overwhelm her. As the event continued, Charlotte found herself speaking to journalists, boutique owners, and influencers. She answered questions about her inspiration and design process, her voice growing steadier with each conversation. Every compliment, every nod of understanding felt like a validation of the path she had chosen. And then she saw him. Logan stood near the entrance, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his presence commanding even in the crowded room. For a moment, Charlotte's breath caught. She hadn't invited him. How could he have known? But then she remembered his message. Of course he would come. Their eyes met across the room and Logan began walking toward her, his expression unreadable. Charlotte's heart raced, but she steadied herself, refusing to let his presence disrupt the evening. "Charlotte," he said softly when he reached her, his gaze lingering on her face. "This is incredible. I had to see it for myself." "Logan," she replied, her tone calm and measured. "What are you doing here?" He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "I didn't want to disturb you, but I couldn't stay away. I've been thinking a lot about what I said the last time we spoke, about understanding who you've become. Standing here, seeing all of this, it's clearer to me now than ever that I never truly appreciated you." Charlotte didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure if she wanted to. Part of her felt a pang of the old ache his words had once caused, but another part, the stronger part, felt detached, as if those wounds no longer defined her. "This isn't about you, Logan," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "This is about me, about everything I've fought for and built without you." Logan nodded, his expression shifting to one of quiet acceptance. "I know that, and I know I don't have a place in this anymore. I just wanted you to know how proud I am of you. Charlotte, you've created something extraordinary." Before she could reply, Maria appeared at her side, beaming. "Charlotte, someone from Vogue wants to speak with you." Charlotte turned to Maria, the weight of the moment sinking in. She looked back at Logan, who took a step back, giving her space. "Go," he said, a faint smile on his lips. "This is your night." Without another word, Charlotte turned and followed Maria toward the journalist. She didn't look back. The evening of the showcase arrived, and Soho was alive with energy. The venue, a sleek industrial space with high ceilings and exposed brick, was filled with the chatter of fashion insiders, journalists, and influencers. Charlotte stood near the back of the room, watching the event unfold. Her collection, Emerge, was displayed under warm golden lights, each piece telling a story of resilience and reinvention. 6 mannequins stood on a platform showcasing her designs, bold cuts, elegant fabrics, and striking details. A sign next. To the display read, "Emerge, a celebration of resilience and identity by Charlotte Reed." Charlotte adjusted her blazer dress, a piece from her collection, and took a steadying breath. The magnitude of the moment felt overwhelming. All the years of self-doubt, of being made to feel small, had led to this. And now, she was here, standing in her own light. Maria, the workshop director, approached with an encouraging smile. "You've got a crowd gathering over there," she said, gesturing toward the platform. "People are talking, Charlotte. They see it, they see you." Charlotte followed Maria's gaze and noticed a group of attendees admiring her collection. A boutique owner and a journalist from an online fashion magazine were discussing the details of one of her gowns, pointing out the intricate stitching and the confident silhouette. As the night progressed, Charlotte found herself speaking to more and more people, buyers, stylists, and even a few celebrities' assistants. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, but what struck her most were the personal comments. One woman in her 40s approached, her eyes slightly misty. "Your collection reminds me of the woman I want to be, strong and unapologetic. Thank you for creating something that feels like it was made for someone like me." The woman's words left Charlotte momentarily speechless. This was exactly what she had hoped to achieve, and hearing it aloud filled her with pride. And then, amidst the crowd, she saw him. Logan stood near the entrance, his figure unmistakable in a tailored charcoal suit. His presence was commanding, just as it had always been. But something in his demeanor had shifted. He wasn't here to dominate the room. He seemed to be here for her. Charlotte's stomach twisted, but she steadied herself. This night wasn't about him. It was about her and everything she had built. Logan began walking toward her, his expression unreadable. She met him halfway, unwilling to let him interrupt her success on her own terms. "Logan," she said, her tone cool but composed, "what are you doing here?" "I heard about the showcase," he replied, his voice soft but steady. "I had to see it for myself." "Charlotte, all of this is extraordinary. You're extraordinary." Charlotte folded her arms, her expression unyielding. "You didn't need to come here to tell me that." Logan hesitated, searching her face. "I know, but I wanted to. I needed to. I wanted to see the woman you've become." She stared at him for a long moment, his words washing over her like distant waves. There was a time when those words would have meant everything to her, but now they felt like an echo of a past she had moved beyond. "This isn't about you, Logan," she said, her voice firm but calm. "This is my night, my work, my future. I don't need your approval to know my worth anymore." Logan nodded, slowly, his expression shifting to one of quiet acceptance. "I know," he said softly, "and I'm so proud of you, Charlotte. I just hope one day you'll believe me when I say I regret everything I did to hurt you." Before Charlotte could respond, Maria appeared at her side. "Charlotte, someone from Vogue wants to speak with you," she said, her excitement evident. Charlotte turned back to Logan, her decision already made. "Goodbye, Logan." Without waiting for his reply, she followed Maria across the room, her heels clicking confidently against the polished floor. She didn't look back. As she spoke with the journalist, Charlotte felt a sense of clarity she hadn't expected. Logan's presence no longer had power over her. Her strength, her vision, her future, they were hers and hers alone. The morning after the showcase, Charlotte awoke to sunlight pouring through her bedroom window, the warmth of it, a reminder of the triumph she had claimed the night before. Her phone sat on the bedside table, buzzing intermittently with notifications. Emails, social media tags, and congratulatory texts from friends and new industry connections flooded in. But one notification stood out, a follow-up email from Samantha at Vogue. "Charlotte, it was a pleasure meeting you at the showcase. Your work speaks volumes, not just in design but in purpose. We're thrilled to feature you in our upcoming issue. Let's coordinate next week for an in-depth interview and photo shoot. Excited to see what's next for you. Warmly, Samantha." Charlotte's breath caught as she read the email, her heart swelling with pride and disbelief. This was real. Her designs, her story, her journey, it was going to be shared with the world. She sat back against her headboard, clutching the phone to her chest, allowing herself a moment to savor it. Her morning coffee tasted sweeter than usual as she sat by her small apartment window, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. For the first time in years, her thoughts weren't consumed by doubt or regret. Instead, she thought about what lay ahead, expanding her collection, telling more stories through her designs, and embracing a future that was wholly her own. As she finished her coffee, another message popped up on her phone. This one was from Logan. "I hope I didn't overstep last night. I wanted to tell you how proud I am of you, but maybe I should have stayed out of the way. If you're willing, I'd still like to have a proper conversation. No expectations, just honesty." Charlotte stared at the message for a long time. She knew Logan's words weren't meant to manipulate or disrupt her progress. This version of him seemed genuine, even vulnerable. But she couldn't ignore the complicated swirl of emotions his presence still evoked. Her instinct told her not to respond. And yet something within her nudged her to at least hear him out, if only to close a chapter that still lingered at the edges of her mind. After a few moments, she typed, "I'll think about it. But right now, my focus is on moving forward." With Farm, she set her phone aside and turned her attention to the sketches spread across her dining table. Her collection had been a success, but now it was time to think about what came next. She picked up her pencil and began sketching a new design, letting the ideas flow freely, unencumbered by fear or doubt. Later that afternoon, Charlotte received a call from Maria. "Charlotte, I just got off the phone with someone from the Metropolitan Fashion Collective. They want to feature Emerge in their upcoming gala." Charlotte's eyes widened, The Metropolitan Fashion Collective was one of the most prestigious showcases in the industry, a platform where emerging designers could solidify their place among the elite. "That's incredible," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "It's more than incredible," Maria replied, her excitement palpable. "This is the kind of opportunity that could take your brand global." As the call ended, Charlotte felt a rush of adrenaline. She had spent so long questioning her abilities, her worth, and her future, and now the answers were becoming clear. Every moment of self-doubt, every setback had led her to this point. That evening, as the city lights twinkled outside her window, Charlotte allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought about the woman she used to be, the one who lived in the shadow of someone else's ambitions, who questioned her own value. And she thought about the woman she had become, the one who was building something extraordinary from the ground up. And for the first time, she didn't just feel like she was moving forward. She felt unstoppable. 2 weeks later, Charlotte found herself stepping into the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Fashion Collective Gala, an event she had only ever dreamed of attending. The space was breathtaking, chandeliers cascading with light-polished marble floors and towering floral arrangements in hues of deep red and gold. The air buzzed with the energy of the fashion elite, and for the first time Charlotte didn't feel like she was out of place. She wore a gown from her own collection, a shimmering silver design with a plunging neckline and dramatic cape sleeves. It was a bold statement, one that reflected her journey and the strength she had fought to reclaim. As she walked through the crowd, she noticed heads turning, whispers following in her wake. Maria and Evelyn were already at the venue, beaming, with pride as they waved her over. "Charlotte," Maria said, her voice full of excitement, "your display is getting so much attention. People are stopping, asking about your inspiration, your process. They're seeing it, Charlotte. They're seeing you." Charlotte smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude and disbelief. "I can't believe we're here," she said, taking in the room. Evelyn placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You earned this, every single bit of it." As the evening unfolded, Charlotte found herself surrounded by industry professionals, buyers, journalists, even a renowned editor from Elle. She spoke with poise and confidence, each conversation reinforcing her sense of belonging. At one point, Samantha from Vogue approached her with a glass of champagne. "Charlotte, I've been meaning to tell you, your feature is already generating buzz. People are going to want more from you after this. You're officially on the radar." "Thank you," Charlotte replied, her voice steady despite the surge of emotions within her. "I've been waiting for this moment for so long." As the night wore on, Charlotte took a moment to herself, stepping out onto the balcony that overlooked the city. The cool night air brushed against her skin, grounding her as she gazed at the glittering skyline. It was a reminder of how far she had come from the woman who once questioned her worth to the designer standing in her own light. And then, as if on cue, a familiar voice broke the silence. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" She turned to see Logan standing a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his expression soft but unreadable. He wasn't dressed in his usual suit, but in a more understated ensemble, black slacks and a fitted jacket. "I thought you might be here," he said, taking a step closer. "This is your world now, and I couldn't be prouder of you for stepping into it." Charlotte folded her arms, her gaze steady. "What do you want, Logan?" He sighed, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. "I didn't come here to interrupt your night or take away from your success. I wanted to see it for myself, to see you thriving." She didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch as she studied him. There was no arrogance. In his stance, no lingering condescension. He seemed smaller somehow, humbled by the distance that now stood between them. "Logan," she said finally, her voice calm but firm, "whatever this is, it doesn't change anything. I've moved on. You're part of my past, and that's where I need you to stay." He nodded slowly, the acceptance clear in his expression. "I know. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry for everything, and that I'm happy for you, truly." For the first time, Charlotte felt no anger, no regret, no unresolved ache. Just clarity. "Thank you," she said, her tone softer now. "And I hope you find what you're looking for, Logan. But my life isn't tied to you anymore." With that, she turned back toward the glittering skyline, her heart steady and her mind clear. Logan stayed for a moment longer before quietly leaving the balcony, and with him, the last vestiges of her past. Charlotte stayed there for a while, the city stretching out before her like a promise. This was her moment, her future, her world, and for the first time in a long time she felt entirely, undeniably whole. Months had passed since the Metropolitan Fashion Collective Gala, and Charlotte's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. Her collection, Emerge, had become a symbol of strength and reinvention, gaining recognition far beyond the New York fashion scene. Her feature in Vogue had sparked a wave of opportunities, collaborations with high-profile boutiques, invitations to international fashion weeks, and even interest from a global retailer who wanted to produce a limited edition of her designs. But what thrilled her most wasn't the accolades or the growing list of clients. It was the messages she received from women around the world. "Your story inspired me to take control of my life again. Thank you for creating clothes that make women like me feel powerful. I see myself in your designs, and for the first time I feel seen." Charlotte saved every message, reading them whenever doubt tried to creep back in. These were the reminders of why she started, why she fought to reclaim her voice. Her days were now a whirlwind of creative sessions, business meetings, and moments of quiet reflection. Her small apartment had become a hub of activity, with fabric, samples and sketches covering every surface. She hadn't upgraded her living situation yet, despite her growing success. This space, modest as it was, felt like home, something she had built entirely on her own. On a rare evening off, Charlotte sat on her couch with a glass of wine, her laptop balanced on her knees. She was reviewing designs for her next collection, but her mind kept wandering. She thought about the journey she had been on, the heartbreak, the self-doubt, and the moments when giving up had seemed easier. But then she thought about the woman she had become, the one who had stood in the glow of the spotlight and claimed her place in the world, the one who had faced her past without letting it define her. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from Lauren. "Wine night soon? Miss your face." Charlotte laughed softly, replying with a quick, "Yes, this weekend." Lauren had been there for every step of the journey, her unwavering support a constant reminder that Charlotte was never truly alone. As she set her phone down, she noticed another notification. This one was an email from a prestigious Paris-based fashion house. They were inviting her to collaborate on a capsule collection for their upcoming spring line, a project that would cement her place among the world's most influential designers. Charlotte leaned back, letting the weight of the offer settle over her. It was the kind of opportunity she had once only dreamed of, and now it was within reach. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt calm. She was ready. That night, as she stood by her apartment window, looking out at the glittering city that had once felt so unattainable, Charlotte smiled. The skyline stretched endlessly, a reminder of how far she had come and how much further she could go. Her story wasn't about a man who had doubted her, nor was it about proving him or anyone else wrong. It was about finding herself, reclaiming her voice, and building a life that was entirely beautifully her own. And as the stars blinked above the city, Charlotte knew one thing for certain: she wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. A year later, Charlotte stood backstage at her first solo runway show during Paris Fashion Week. The venue, a historic theater with ornate gilded balconies and velvet curtains, buzzed with anticipation. Her name was printed in bold letters on the programs handed to the elite guests. Charlotte Reed, a vision reclaimed. The collection was a continuation of her journey, each piece woven with themes of liberation, power, and unapologetic individuality. A floor-length gown dyed in rich crimson symbolized rebirth. A tailored suit with exaggerated shoulders declared authority, and a shimmering, sheer overlay dress layered over a bold jumpsuit whispered of vulnerability and resilience coexisting in harmony. Standing in the shadows, watching her models prepare to take the stage, Charlotte felt the familiar rush of nerves that came with moments like these, but they no longer stemmed from fear. Instead, It was the thrill of showing the world her vision, her truth. Charlotte, Maria said, breaking her thoughts. Maria had traveled to Paris to support her, acting as both a mentor and friend. The press is already calling this one of the most anticipated shows of the season. Charlotte smiled, her gratitude for Maria's belief in her journey filling her heart. "Thank you for everything," she said softly. Maria shook her head. "Don't thank me, this was all you." The music started, a steady, powerful beat that reverberated through the theater. One by one, the models stepped onto the runway, their movements precise and fluid. The audience, an impressive mix of editors, buyers, and celebrities, sat enraptured, their eyes glued to every detail. As the final look swept across the runway, the applause began to build, growing louder with each step. By the time Charlotte stepped out for her designer's bow, the room erupted into a standing ovation. She paused at the end of the runway, bathed in the spotlight. The cheers and applause washed over her. But what stood out most was the calm certainty she felt within. She wasn't just Charlotte Reed, the designer. She was Charlotte Reed, the woman who had fought to rebuild herself. After the show, Charlotte attended the exclusive after-party held at a rooftop bar overlooking the Paris skyline. The Eiffel Tower sparkled in the distance, its lights a reminder of the beauty and possibility that came with every new chapter. As she mingled with attendees, she noticed Logan standing at the edge of the crowd. He wasn't dressed for attention, blending into the background with understated ease. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of everything she had achieved. Charlotte didn't feel anger or sadness at the sight of him anymore. Instead, she felt gratitude, not for him, but for the lessons his absence had taught her. His chapter in her life had ended, and she had written the rest of her story without him. She didn't approach him. She didn't need to. Instead, she turned, her attention back to her guests, soaking in their warmth and admiration. The night wasn't about the past. It was about celebrating the future she had created with her own hands. That night, as Charlotte returned to her Paris apartment, she sat by the window, gazing at the city lights. Her laptop was open on the desk nearby, filled with sketches for her next collection. The future was already calling, full of endless possibilities. Charlotte thought back to the woman she had been, a woman who once doubted her place in the world, who questioned her worth. And she thought of the woman she had become, resilient, confident, and wholly herself. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lauren. "You killed it today, superstar. Proud doesn't even begin to cover it. Wine night when you're back, Charlotte?" Laughed softly, her heart full. She replied, "Always miss you already." Closing her eyes, Charlotte leaned back in her chair. The road ahead was still unknown, but she wasn't afraid. She had learned to trust herself, to embrace the uncertainty as part of the adventure. For the first time in her life, she didn't just feel seen. She saw herself, and she liked who she had become. And as the lights of Paris twinkled outside her window, Charlotte smiled. This was just the beginning.